I've always been a big fan of the Assassin's Creed series. Although the first game had its flaws, I actually really enjoyed it. I really liked Altair's redemption story, going from the cocky know-it-all
An excellent kill. Fortune favors your blade.
Not fortune, skill. Watch a while longer and you might learn something.
to a more humbled man that honors the tenets of the Order.
The men we face, their minds are not their own. If you can avoid killing them.
Yes. Though he has betrayed the tenets of the Creed, it does not mean we must as well. I'll do what I can.
It's all I ask. Safety and peace, my friend.
Which makes the end of the game pretty awkward when you're allowed to slaughter civilians without consequence. The game was also notoriously repetitive, which even I can't defend. Assassin's Creed 2 fixed most of the problems I had with the first game, and it ended up being one of my favorite games of all time, and you could also argue that it was the absolute high point of the franchise. The story of Ezio Auditore spans decades in-game. We see Ezio transform from a teenager hell-bent on getting revenge for the death of his family,
are hereby sentenced to death. I swear we will! Father! I'll kill you for what you've done!
but as time goes on, he matures and his motives change as he begins to understand the plight of the assassins and the growing threat of the Templars. Ezio's story not only stands out as a highlight for the franchise, but as a highlight for gaming as a whole. We spent 3 full games with him. We spend a lifetime with this character, watching him grow as a man, seeing his struggles, his triumphs, which makes his story all the more heartbreaking when he, more or less, gives up at the end. Unfortunately, this is when problems started to arise with the franchise. After the overwhelming success of Assassin's Creed 2, Ubisoft started to release the games annually, and in my opinion, the series just hasn't been the same since. While I liked the story of Brotherhood and Revelations, there wasn't much difference gameplay-wise between the two. They more or less felt like expansion packs for the second game, with slight changes to combat which essentially boiled down to press X to murder everything, which at the time was a welcome change to the sit-back and counter combat that we saw in Assassin's Creed 1 and 2. I have to admit though, the stories in Brotherhood and Revelations were weaker compared to previous installments. Cesare wasn't a very intimidating villain. In fact, to me, he kind of looked like a medieval Adam Gontier. Hell, the only thing added to Revelations was a hook blade, build-a-grenade, and a fucking tower defense minigame. Because, you know, nothing screams Assassin's Creed more like tower defense. Also, in previous games, we had multiple cities to explore. In Assassin's Creed 1, you could climb the Great Mosque in Jerusalem and walk its busy streets. The next, you could go to the plague-ridden and battle-scarred city of Acre. In Assassin's Creed 2, you had Florence with its high towers and impressive architecture. Then you could be sailing the canals of Venice in a gondola. My point being is there was a variety in the places we visited, and the journey between the cities, albeit a bit empty, made it feel like we were on a grand adventure across a massive country. In Brotherhood we only had Rome to explore, and in Revelations we had Constantinople, and while both were very beautiful to look at and very different from one another in regards to the different cultures both cities are associated with, in my opinion, I got very tired of looking at the same city for the entire game. Then along came Assassin's Creed 3, and personally, I liked it. In fact, it's probably my next favorite one in the series, even though Connor was admittedly a rather dull protagonist, but its setting is what really won me over. The War of Independence, the birth of a country before our very eyes. We interact with some huge figures in history like George Washington and Ben Franklin. Even though the battles are less interactive than promoted, I thought the battle for Bunker Hill was still a very epic part of the game. The chaos on display, especially in the part when you're running through the city as it's getting the living hell blown out of it, still stands out in my mind. This game also saw a return to a more kind of open world to the previous games, with multiple cities and parts of the countryside to explore. It also introduced a feature that would remain as a key feature for most of the later games, that being the sailing and the ship combat. However, I kind of thought the platforming was a little less than stellar. Before we had castles and towers that seemed like an endless climb to the top, but Assassin's Creed 3 didn't really have any of that. Instead, we were able to climb trees. Yay. Combat also saw some huge changes. Instead of pressing X to murder everything, sometimes we occasionally had to press A. Yeah, combat in Assassin's Creed has never really been all that innovative. Assassin's Creed 3 does, however, have one of the coolest scenes in franchise history, when Connor is sitting in the bar with Charles after they beat the living shit out of each other. You can see how they both kind of respect each other and how Charles accepts that this is the end for him. And Assassin's Creed 3 was also the last in the series that I bought. By the time Black Flag was announced, I was burnt out. I didn't think it looked all that interesting, mostly because I'm not the biggest fan of pirates. However, I borrowed it, and when I eventually did get around to playing it, I thought it was a very good pirate game. But as an Assassin's Creed game, it just wasn't very good. I know that's not a popular opinion to have, seeing as Black Flag is practically loved by everybody who's a fan of the franchise. But aside from doing all the side stuff like sailing around in your ship, blowing the shit out of everything you see, looking for buried treasure, and singing a song with your mates, which was all awesome, the rest of the game just really felt like a tailing mission simulator amid a very boring plot that even Edward hardly gave a shit about. I also think Edward was kind of a Ubisoft's attempt to make a Ezio 2.0. You know what'd be fucking cool though? If Ubisoft actually made a full-fledged pirate game. Oh my god. Then just a year later they announced not one, but 2 Assassin's Creed games. The fuck? Most people bought Unity and were bombarded with a game that was blatantly broken and in my opinion is an example of an absolute failure of a launch for such a high profile franchise since Rome 2. Rogue was largely forgotten as it was released on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. However, I heard that it was actually pretty decent, and admittedly I was more intrigued with it than I was with Unity. Mostly because of the twist that we're playing as a Templar assassinating assassins. But I couldn't bring myself to purchase either game. Syndicate almost doesn't even exist in my mind because at that point I just stopped for listening for word of a new Assassin's Creed game. I was done, and I think most people were as well, because Ubisoft later said that they would not release a new game the following year, instead expressing a desire to focus on the quality of individual titles, which I think is an excellent idea that I wish more AAA game devs would follow. Assassin's Creed has been a series of highs and lows, and unfortunately the recent lows can be attributed to the series not having time to catch its breath and innovate. But there is still hope. Since the announcement of Origin, I, for the first time in a while, have actually been looking forward to a new Assassin's Creed game. The gameplay seems to have gone through some changes, some good, some bad, but that's just based on the videos I've seen. The setting feels like a breath of fresh air, and I'm very excited to see the story of how the Assassins and the Templars came to be. Hopefully, Ubisoft has learned some new tricks in their time away from the franchise, but I suppose we'll find out when the game gets released, and I personally am very intrigued to see what's in store for us. Also, could you do us a favor and get rid of the modern day shit? Just, ugh, fuck, stop.